Whatever it takes to retain power.
Trump is an autocrat, and when an autocrat tells you what he is and what he's going to do, we should believe him. Good afternoon, and welcome to The Count, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Emily Galvin-Almanza, and this is my co-host, Alana Sivan. Y'all, it's Monday, day before the end of voting. There's about 24 hours left, a little over 24 hours until the polls will close on the East Coast. Obviously, tomorrow will play a crucial role in defining the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. And of course, Senate, House, local elections, lots of influential decisions being made tomorrow. But of course, this isn't the end of the election. Sorry. In America, my understanding, and I think yours as well, is that we count all the votes to find out who the winner is. That's right. It sounds radical. I know you count all the votes and then decide who won, but that's the way we do it. That's the way we've always done it. In fact, historically, no states ever expect to have their final count finished on Election Day. Why am I bringing this up? Well, because Donald Trump and his Republican enablers would, of course, prefer very much to just decide that he won the election and then stop the counting. Prevent Americans from having their voices heard or having their votes counted. They are talking about this constantly, and that's actually going to be the subject of our episode today. And the reason they're talking about it constantly is because they are very scared of what your votes say. So, look, we get it. We get why Trump is scared of the votes not coming out his way. High turnout is bad for him. High turnout is bad for Republicans. Their agenda is, frankly, unpopular. And the majority of people don't like them or approve of the job they're doing. So it is understandable why they would not want to count all the votes. But unfortunately for them, there's like an avalanche of votes, people. And not to diminish any of your plans for the next 24 hours if you haven't voted yet, but you still have a little over 24 hours left to contribute to perhaps the most historic voter turnout in American history.
That's right, Emily. And early voting has now officially ended in many states, but will resume everywhere tomorrow. But as of this afternoon, when we're talking about high turnout, more than 97 million ballots have been cast. That is more than, get this, 70% of the entire 2016 total. Texas, meanwhile, already surpassed its entire 2016 total in early voting, while 9 other states surpassed 90% of their 2016 vote total in early votes. That includes Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, all which could play a huge role in this coming election. Now, those nearly 100 million early votes and counting are exciting. They're historic, but it's super important to remember. We have to make sure that every vote counts, because this record turnout only makes a difference if all of those votes are counted. And that might seem something super simple, and you might be watching and thinking, why do they keep talking about votes counting? Because unfortunately, in the world that we live in now, our very democracy is being threatened through this threat to not count those votes.
Well, Trump and the Republicans clearly don't care about democracy. Hate to say it, they only care about themselves. They only care about winning by whatever means necessary. And over the weekend, we saw more signs of this, more signs that Donald Trump and his GOP allies are intent on silencing the will of the people, subverting our democracy. We launched this show a month ago. If you've been with us this whole time, thank you. Hope we're still funny. But we launched this show to talk about this desperate plot that has been brewing to set aside the will of the people, to set aside your vote, throw out millions of legitimate votes. And I will be honest with you, when we started talking about it, I was a little bit worried. I was sort of like, oh, this is a pretty extreme plot. Are they really going to go through with this? The last week, I don't feel like a day has gone by when we haven't seen some sort of sign of the intent of Donald Trump and his enablers to do something to undermine American democracy. So over the weekend, we saw reports citing Trump advisors and confidants, people in the inner circle, who told the New York Times and Axios that Trump is planning to initiate this plot on Election Day by falsely claiming victory long before all the votes are counted. Election day evening, he's going to go into the Oval Office and claim victory. Then, amid the chaos and confusion that, let's remember, is caused largely by his allies litigating in states across the country, his supporters showing up in caravans with guns and, ramming a Biden bus. All of that chaos and confusion is designed to allow him an opportunity to undermine the validity of uncounted mail-in ballots, leaning on state Republicans and elected officials, pressuring them to shut down the count, and letting that pressure go all the way up to the Supreme Court, which he is counting on helping him throw out the votes and cheat his way to an illegitimate second term.
And Trump did eventually deny those reports, and these reports that he plans to quote unquote declare victory tomorrow. But let's be clear, I do not believe him. And there's a reason for that. We've told you on many, many times on this show, if you've been watching, and if not, that's okay, that we should believe what the autocrat actually tells us. And he has signaled to us time and time again exactly what he is going to do. In fact, when he denied those reports yesterday, he also admitted that his strategy revolves around appearing like he won on election night before millions of ballots are counted. So that's what I believe. I don't believe him when he says he's not going to declare victory tomorrow. In fact, let's play you all that clip where he shows us what he's really going to do.
Because it can only lead to one thing, and that's very bad. You know what that thing is. I think it's a very dangerous, terrible thing. And I think it's terrible when we can't know the results of an election the night of the election in a modern day age of computer. I think it's a terrible thing. And I happen to think it was a terrible decision for our country made by the Supreme Court. I think it was a terrible decision for our country. And I think it's a very dangerous decision because you're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 states, depending on how it ends up, where they're tabulating ballots. And the rest of the world is waiting to find out. And I think there's great danger to it. And I think a lot of fraud and misuse can take place. I think it's a terrible decision by the Supreme Court. A terrible decision. Now, I don't know if that's going to be changed because we're going to go in the night of, as soon as that election's over, we're going in with our lawyers. But we don't want to have Pennsylvania where you have a political governor, a very partisan guy. And we don't want to have other states like Nevada where you have the head of the Democratic clubhouse as your governor. We don't want to be in a position where he's allowed to every day watch ballots come in. Gee, if we could only find 10,000 more ballots. Because we're doing great in Nevada, we're doing great in Arizona, we're doing great all over. But if you take Nevada or Pennsylvania, and everyone knows what happens in Philadelphia, you don't have to say it, but I've read about it for years. And I don't think it's fair that we have to wait a long period of time after the election. If people wanted to get their ballots in, they should have gotten their ballots in long before that, a long time. They don't have to put their ballots in the same day. They could have put their ballots in a month ago. And we think it's a ridiculous decision. Thank you.
Oh, man. There's a lot going on there. Couple of things. I still don't understand his continued predilection for speaking loudly in front of helicopters. 2, boy, that's a typical Trump move, isn't it? There's a lot of things going on in Pennsylvania. I'm not going to say it, but you know what's going on. That's not even enough information for a Google search, and it is entirely invented. Third of all, Democrats have a clubhouse? I'm so left out. Anyway.
I feel like a lot of times Trump just sort of speaks in just gibberish and with a lot of vague statements that slightly hint to what he's going to do, but also don't make sense to most people.
It's a little bit like reading one of those ancient tablets where like a third of the words have eroded and you're trying to put together these fragments and figure out what the actual meaning is. The last thing I want to mention, the Supreme Court decision he's whining about came last week. It allowed extended ballot deadlines to stand. In other words, states had decided their own rules for themselves in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. North Carolina gave 9 days after the election. Pennsylvania gave 3 days after the election to basically let ballots that had been mailed in time, postmarked before Election Day, but had been delayed by someone's dismantled postal service, letting those ballots still be counted. The Supreme Court let the state decisions stand. So that's what Trump's upset about. And I just want to say, Alana, to throw one more thing out there. We talked about this before the show, but I think it's worth inviting our viewers in on, which is that the best thing that local Republicans, elected Republicans, state Republicans, and frankly, a heavily Republican Supreme Court could do to repair the legitimacy of that party would be to not give Trump the judicial victory he's looking for. He is counting on legislators and judges to play on his team and to not play on the team of American democracy. There's a shred of dignity out for the grabbing, and I just hope they grab it.
You're absolutely right. And I think at this point, we've said this a few times, that it's going to be a real test for those conservative members of the party who maybe have some shred of dignity and want to save our democracy here. But I want to point out two things from what we just watched and sort of dissect the gibberish that we just heard. So first, I want to talk about why Trump really doesn't like this decision. And then second, I want to talk about why he's saying he doesn't like this decision. So he does not want mail-in ballots to be counted. And there is a reason for that. We've talked a bit on this show about the blue shift and the red mirage. That means day of the election, there could be, and Trump is hoping that there will be what's called a red mirage, meaning millions of ballots will not have been counted. Most of those ballots, for reasons we'll discuss a little bit later, are from Democrats. And so before all of those ballots have been counted, it could look like Republicans are winning, and that's what Trump is hoping for. Once those ballots come in, looks like he's winning, he will want to say, don't count any of those other ballots, not because they're fraudulent, not because there's problems with mail-in voting, but because they do not serve his agenda. Now, instead, he is saying that it is unfair not to have a result on election day because people deserve to have a result on election day. And that people, because election day works the way it's always worked, should have mailed in their ballots a month ago. There's no requirement in the law that ballots should have been mailed a month ago. And in fact, he's also forgetting to mention the reason, just like you said, Emily, that a lot of the ballots are not getting there on time because of his sabotage to the United States Postal Service. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to what you were saying that if you expect people to make up their minds in this election a month ago, I mean, sure, I had my mind made up perhaps, but he should have actually been really happy that perhaps people who voted for him before but weren't happy with his performance over the last 4 years gave him that extra month to try and prove himself, didn't make their decision right after that ludicrous first debate where he was a rabid bat. I mean, he should be thrilled that anyone is waiting to cast their vote at this point. Sorry to interject, but I just
no, that's a great point. And I think also, when he uses the quote in that clip where he says, Democrats are going to say, let's find 10,000 ballots and throw them in there. No, senor. That means he wants to count the ballots. People want to count the ballots that are coming and not find them.
There's historic turnout. There's literally piles of ballots. I swear to you, there are parts of Philadelphia where I bet you could walk in a room, throw a rock and hit a ballot. I mean, everyone is voting in fervent numbers. But let's talk about the subtext here. The line that stood out to me. Trump says, we're going to go in the night of. As soon as the election's over, we're going in with our lawyers. Now, the night of and the election's over, to me, are totally different dates. The election will in no way be over the night of unless there is a ludicrous Biden landslide. Why do I say that? Because we expect mail-in ballots to be so much more heavily Democratic than ballots cast in person. If there's a Biden victory, even without all of those mail-in ballots, it's a pretty solidly reliable result that people can go with. Is the election over? No. Does the count need to proceed? Yes. Every ballot needs to be counted, no matter what, no matter who's ahead. But there is a big difference between a Biden landslide on election day and Trump being up due to a red mirage. But he says he clearly thinks that the election's over in the night of or the same day, which they are not. He's wrong. But he is going to go in with his lawyers. Now, there's some question of what his lawyers are going to do. This goes back again to him counting on the judiciary, a third of the federal bench who he's appointed, playing on his team. He's counting on the Supreme Court, a massive number of whom he's appointed playing on his team. Under the US Constitution, though, there is, in fact, a much longer deadline for finalizing the vote count. This year, it falls on December 8th, which is the so-called safe harbor date. Yes, you heard me right. There is more than a month legally after the election in which states absolutely have to be allowed to count their ballots. So what Trump is saying isn't just wrong, it's actually unconstitutional. We don't know how long it's going to take to count these votes. We really hope it won't take that long. And there's actually beautiful, I have to say so much love and respect to the folks working in local election work who are, this is honest work done under extreme pressure. And there are so many local officials standing up right now and saying, we'll have our votes counted, give us 24 hours, give us 48 hours. They're promising to do their best to deliver in these historic circumstances as fast as possible. Every time I see that, I'm like, they shouldn't have to. Like, we should not have a gun to the heads of election workers, right? We should let them count on a sane schedule, but they're going to stay up all night. They're going to count votes as fast as possible. That does not mean there will be a result the night of. In Pennsylvania, a state that, due to GOP-backed laws, doesn't even start counting mail-in ballots until Election Day, a rule that drives me crazy every time I mention it. There are some counties in Pennsylvania that have said they're not even going to start counting mail-in ballots on Election Day. They're going to start counting on Wednesday. So that means that by the time Donald Trump is telling you he wants to declare victory, there will be states in a key swing state that haven't even started counting by their own plan and rules. So the only way to read this is that Donald Trump is banking on those lawyers being able to pull some kind of crony decision out of a federal court or the US Supreme Court. He's banking on being ahead in the preliminary count, being up at some point during the day on Tuesday, at which point he's going to go rogue and unilaterally define the victory as being in his own camp. Then he will unleash his lawyers. Alana and I have been public defenders for a long time, and we have seen perhaps some lawyers file some things that were possibly not meritorious. I hate to break it to y'all, but lawyers file the things their clients want them to say all the time, even if they know it's wrong. They're not supposed to. It's unethical. But Alana, do they do it?
Oh, all the time. And so, there are a few things that I want to talk about here first. When we talk about this pressure that is placed on election officials to count every vote, it sort of goes with the theme of the past 4 years, which is your favorite reality television show that you didn't want to live in, but unfortunately...
Your least favorite. It's not my favorite.
It's fun to watch when it doesn't affect anyone, but it affects everybody in this day. And so, but that's not what our election law is supposed to be. That's not what our election should be, and it's not what our democracy should be. But let's talk a little bit right now. I want to shift and talk a little bit about Pennsylvania. So Trump really, really needs Pennsylvania and its 20 electoral college votes. The problem is that recent polls have shown that he is not likely to get those 20 electoral college votes, and that Joe Biden has a significant advantage in Pennsylvania. So what is Trump going to do? What is he likely to do? Cheat to win, which is why he's been laying the groundwork to do so. So we talked a little bit earlier about the 97 million early votes that have been cast already. Now, 2/3 of those votes are mail-in ballots. In Pennsylvania alone, voters have returned more than 2.4 million mail-in or absentee ballots. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We're in a pandemic. Many Americans have chosen to vote by mail this year because it's safer than being in crowded places or crowded lines. And something that's important to know, and that we touched on earlier as well, is that these votes are likely to lean heavily Democratic for a lot of reasons. First of all, this is just a trend that we've seen even before the pandemic. But right now, that trend is even more heightened, because Democrats are more likely to be concerned about COVID-19 than Republicans, as evidenced by Trump's recent super spreader campaign tours, which have resulted in thousands of transmissions across the country. He has also undermined faith in mail-in voting, period. And he's done that very intentionally because he's aware of this trend and he wants to discount as many mail-in ballots as possible. And so when we're looking specifically at Pennsylvania, the numbers here are particularly telling. Get this, 1.6 million returned ballots so far are from Democrats. Let's compare that to Republicans, where the number is 550,000. That is a 3-to-1 advantage for Democrats. So based on these factors, Trump is absolutely hoping to benefit from taking advantage of the red shift or the red mirage and discounting every vote that could come in and create a blue shift.
You know, Alana, the more I think about this, like, Democrats have been fighting for years to make voting easier. Like, I don't know, Tuesdays are days when most people have to work and kids have to be in school. So, like, why don't we have Election Day be a federal holiday? Oh, you don't want an extra federal holiday. Okay, cool. How about we just move Election Day to like a Saturday? Oh, you're not willing to do that. Okay, well, there's all of these attempts always by Democrats to make elections easier to access. Mm-hmm. And of course, what we're seeing here, you know, is decades of crappy GOP efforts to make voting harder. But I will say that it gives me a little bit of hope because I feel like now that people have had a taste of like voting made a lot easier because of broadened absentee voting availability, early voting availability, like all of that stuff, I feel like we're not going to go back. Everybody's going to be like, I want to vote 2 weeks before the election on a Saturday on my own time. Give me that back.
I'm sorry. Well, something I do want to highlight, just sort of like a little side note, that before Trump and continued during Trump, our voting system has never been perfect. Sort of like you were saying, like there's been tons of voter suppression. It's really difficult just to be able to vote. I mean, I was just on the phone with my mom today, and there was a whole issue with like the dropping and the names and the matching and all of these other sorts of things where she was just trying to track down her ballot and she had to call like 4 different people. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. And I don't want to say that our election system is perfect. It's not. But what it is not full of is fraud, right? Like there have been experts who have talked about how it is more likely to be struck for a voter to be struck by lightning than it is to commit voter fraud. And so our system needs a lot of work, but fraud, not a real thing.
Fraud is, however, very useful if you are perhaps a candidate who is down in the polls and trying desperately to shut down vote counting while everyone is looking at a momentary boost in your numbers before we get into the vast closets full of Democrat ballots. Fraud is what Trump uses to breed chaos, to create a feeling that, I mean, we even saw it in that ruling by Brett Kavanaugh the other day, where he lionized this idea that fear of fraud was a very legitimate reason to create deadlines that excluded voters legitimately cast votes. Very, very weird to see that happening at the Supreme Court level. But of course, if you can simply shut down the vote while the red mirage is happening, you can stop the blue shift from ever happening and prevent reality from setting in. And people have been trying to like do this in the form of sports metaphors, but what we're really talking about here is the equivalent of a team claiming victory at halftime, like, and then just refusing to play the second half. For football fans, there was a Super Bowl a few years ago where the Falcons were beating the Patriots 28-3 at halftime. I don't want to make any enemies here, but there are a significant number of people who do like watching the Patriots get beat. People are going to throw things at me from Boston, but they were up 28-3. Yes, the Patriots could have just been like, well, that's it. Or I'm sorry, the Falcons could have been like, well, that's it. We're quitting. We're not playing the second half. We're up so far. We have a Falcon mirage. There's fraud. there's chaos. Stop the game. We're up now. We win. That's not how the game works. Like Trump claiming victory on election night is the Falcons claiming victory at halftime. Except the reality here is like, if they claimed victory at halftime and the score was like 14-13. Anyway, if you're not a sports person, I hope that's still clear because it was very basic.
It's like getting mad during the play when the ending is not the same at what happened before intermission.
Yeah, exactly. Although I do that. I quit TV shows and sometimes I walk out of plays. But
I usually fast forward to the end so that I can know if I want to keep watching. But yeah.
But it's not like a hard concept to grasp. Where the rules of the game are the people vote, we count the votes, we decide a winner. It's like it's not rocket surgery. And the most absurd part about this strategy is that Trump probably isn't only going to try it on Pennsylvania. This is not just a Pennsylvania problem. We have a clip here of Trump's campaign spokesperson, Jason Miller, making it clear that by the campaign standard, they get to claim victory in any state where the count appears to favor them on election night. Let's play that clip.
If you speak with many smart Democrats, they believe that President Trump will be ahead on election night, probably getting 280 electoral, somewhere in that range. And then they're going to try to steal it back after the election. We believe that we will be over 290 electoral votes on election night. So no matter what they try to do, what kind of hijinks or lawsuits or whatever kind of nonsense they try to pull off, we're still going to have enough electoral votes to get President Trump reelected.
Why? Why do we watch these clips, really? I mean, so first of all, electoral votes are not awarded on election night. Let's just throw that out there.
They're going to get 280 electoral. I'm such an in person that I don't say electoral votes. I just say 280 electoral.
That's just not how it works. And I think also, I mean, first of all, you didn't earn anything, buddy, before all the votes are counted. There's nothing to steal because you have won nothing. And so it's quite childish to say that there's something to be stolen back when we're still in the middle of counting votes. And so using your sports analogy, Emily, it's like, accusing the other team of trying to steal the game back by deciding to show up and play in the third quarter. And I can't believe I use a sports analogy because I don't really watch sports like that, but I'm sure there are people proud of me now.
I'm proud of you, Alana. It's really childish. So I'm actually thinking there's this thing my kid has started doing where she's really little. She's a toddler. And, I'm trying to be a good parent. I'm trying to be like consistent and set boundaries. So I'll say things like, I'm going to take this cookie away because you didn't eat your peas. And she does this thing now where like, she'll come up to me and she'll be like, Mama, I am taking your phone away because you didn't drink your coffee. And it's just like, she's very strict. She'll say, that's not very nice. You're not being very nice. And this is like totally exactly what Trump does, right? Which is just he's like parroting whatever he's up to at the moment and projecting it onto everybody else around him, just like my 3-year-old. So except for that she's not trying to subvert American democracy that I know of yet. I don't know. She's got potential. But this entire effort to throw out ballots and create chaos and stop the count is done under this ridiculous guise that mail-in voting is somehow susceptible to widespread fraud. You just said it a minute ago. I'm going to say it again. A voter is more likely to get hit by lightning than to commit voter fraud. There is literally zero evidence of voter fraud being widespread. Studies have shown that mail-in voter fraud is so rare that it involves a fraction so minuscule that I don't even know how to say it. There was a study of 14.6 million mail-in votes cast in 2016 and 2018. And of those votes, 0.0025% potentially involved fraud. That is infinitesimally small. And you know what? Every time we see a case of voter fraud, and it is often Trump voters, that's a case of somebody getting caught because the protections to prevent voter fraud actually work. And that figure that I just gave you, that teensy 0.0025% figure, that reflects cases referred to law enforcement. So that doesn't involve people who are actually convicted of voter fraud or pled guilty to voter fraud. And Alana and I will happily tell you, at length as former public defenders that like just because something gets referred to law enforcement doesn't mean it actually happened. So a lot of that teensy tiny percentage might have been people who were wrongly accused or got confused or had the wrong intent or just were sloppy.
Right. So I actually can't believe we haven't talked about this before, but there's one case particularly worth noting. Crystal Mason in Texas. Definitely Google her case. She is a Black woman who was sentenced to federal prison for casting a provisional ballot in the 2016 election. Her vote didn't even end up counting, by the way. But prosecutors argue that she deliberately committed a crime when she voted in violation of a law that strips people with felony records of their right to vote. Now, Mason was on supervised release at the time, which means in Texas that you're not still in prison, but in Texas you are required to complete all the conditions of your punishment before you can vote. Now, this is kind of an obscure law, and it seems counterintuitive. And so Mason insisted, and it makes a lot of sense, that she had no idea that she was ineligible to vote, and she would never have risked her freedom if she had known. But prosecutors decided to throw the book at her anyways.
Yeah, this case is so infuriating and so telling. I mean, so voter fraud is vanishingly rare, but it seems safe to assume that a not insignificant portion of the cases Republicans will give you as evidence of fraud existing at all are actually just examples of like the criminal punishment system being weaponized against people of color, which it is in all contexts, including the voting context. Especially immigrants and Black and brown people with records who may legitimately not have been aware. I mean, that's very confusing. She completed her case. She was on supervised release. She wasn't in violation of any terms. She was doing really well. She's like, she didn't like conceal her record and like take steps to make sure they wouldn't find it. She just like thought she was eligible to vote and voted. There's a lot of people who, because the law is confusing, don't know they're doing anything wrong.
Absolutely. And I think it's what's the word? It's interesting to see how there's such a willingness to throw the book at Crystal Mason. But when you see folks coming to polling places and engaging in real intimidation to try to prevent people from exercising their constitutional right to vote, where's the punishment then? And so honestly, it's not surprising that numbers are so low and that these cases are so few and far between. I mean, mail-in voting uses tightly controlled records, and the layers of security are actually really effective at preventing people from casting multiple ballots or impersonating other voters. And plus, listen, voting is valuable. It's obviously super important right now, but would the average person really risk incarceration just to cast one extra vote?
Hey, Alana, let me cut in really quick on the risking incarceration thing, because since there are occasionally people who disagree with us, who show up in our stream and type things like Trump 2020 repeatedly, or call us funny names that we will later use to name our inevitable punk band. Like, I would like to speak for a minute to those people, or if you know any folks who are like that, it is actually a federal crime to intimidate voters at a polling place. So if you were planning to join Trump's army, like Don Jr. asked you to in the video we showed last week, and show up to a polling place and behave in an intimidating manner towards voters, that is a federal crime, and you could go to federal prison for it. So I'm just going to put that out there. Please proceed, Alana.
Absolutely. And all of this is not to suggest, to say that there's certainly nothing to suggest any sort of broader conspiracy. There's no shoveling in votes, lying in votes, votes appearing from nowhere, or whatever Trump and his chief propaganda, Steve Bannon, have suggested. States audit their elections. They're looking to see if everything is going according to the book. And if there's any sort of fraud going on, it's pretty observable. So let's not forget also that a significant portion of the voter fraud cases that we have seen have actually involved Trump supporters, some who have been influenced by Trump's constant lies about how much fraud there actually is. So for example, earlier this month, Trump tweeted a story about a man who had been arrested in Florida for requesting an absentee ballot on the behalf of his deceased wife. He claimed that he requested that ballot, not with the intention of sending both ballots in, but with the intention of seeing if the system actually worked. And why did he most likely do that? Well, because Trump was telling him that the system does not work. He did proclaim to be a Trump supporter. And so the sad thing is that Trump is telling this lie because he needs people to believe the myth of voter fraud. He needs them to believe this myth so that they accept his excuses for losing the election, or contesting the election. And so with all of the lies that he has put out there, it is his supporters who are paying the price for his lies. They're listening to him in very real ways. Emily, just like you were talking about, he's urging people to go to the polls and intimidate voters, which could result in serious consequences for everybody. But he does not care. He only cares about his own image, his own ego, and his own desire to stay in power.
Yeah, I would be really upset if I was, say, married to a fervent Trump supporter who said, well, I'm going to go because the president told me to. I'm going to go to the polling place. The president told me to do it. And my partner went to jail. I would feel really angry and betrayed, let alone if I was the person. But I'm just saying, if your family member, I'm just reinforcing the idea that it's a great time to all be kind to each other as Americans and not let any particular leaders make people act out in ways that could cause chaos and present an opportunity to steal the election. We do have the power to be kind to each other, as it turns out. And actually, that kind of brings me back to this point that there are prominent conservatives seeing this as a moment in which to take a stand that puts them perhaps back on slightly more legitimate ground than they have been if they follow Donald Trump down whatever hole he's going down. Prominent conservative columnist David French, for example, with whom I agree almost never. But he had this tweet last week that laid it out in incredibly simple terms. So it said, "It is deeply disturbing that virtually everywhere, the concerted litigation strategy of the GOP is to make sure that fewer votes count. The strategy goes far, far beyond any legitimate concern about fraud." And I may never say this again about David French, yet here we are. That's actually a great point. Even assuming there is a teensy level of fraud. And actually, let's go farther. Let's assume that it's actually way higher than we're aware of. Let's assume that it exists. Some voter fraud masterminds figured out how to evade all ways of being captured. I don't know. Does that really justify throwing out hundreds of thousands or possibly millions of legitimately cast American votes en masse without any kind of demonstrable proof that they've been tainted? I mean, that to me, I don't see how anyone who is still in any way objective and patriotic and concerned with maintaining our nation could ever say it's okay to let millions of legitimate votes be tossed for almost no reason.
Right. And if election integrity was something that this administration was really concerned about, then the right move would be more investments in our election structures, our election infrastructure, but that has been rejected. And that's because that's not the true concern. The true concern is throwing out legitimate ballots that do not result favorably for the president. And the scary thing here is that, and we're going to shift a little bit, but Trump may not have to succeed in this plan to throw away ballots in order to change the outcome of this election. So it seems likely that those 2.4 million mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania could end up accounting for about a third of all votes cast in the state this year. And that's a lot of votes that Trump is potentially considering trying to.
Can you imagine throwing away a third of a state's ballots? A third.
I mean, that's something that he's obviously going to try, that he's likely to consider to try to do, because Democrats have a 3-to-1 advantage when it comes to mail-in ballots. So this strategy would absolutely work in Trump's favor. And if you remember back in 2016, Trump won Pennsylvania by only 44,000 votes. And so if Trump needed to make up that many votes this year, all he would have to do is throw away those 100,000 mail-in ballots. And that would do just the trick, assuming they had a similar breakdown by party. And if those mail-in ballots happen to be from even more Democratic areas, it would probably be even less than that.
Yeah, I should actually throw in there, going back to the whole like Louis DeJoy Postal Service role in this. There was recently an announcement that the place where the Postal Service was slowest right now, and I'm going to just see if I can find this little piece of information, was in Detroit and Central Philadelphia. So if the Postal Service fails in heavily Democratic areas, then heavily Democratic ballots get delayed. And even though they're postmarked on time, they're not delivered on time. It's all the same grift, as it turns out. I mean, look at where the mail slowdowns are happening. I don't want to sound like somebody who's like connecting yarn to safety pins on the wall behind me, but look at where the mail slowdowns are happening. They're heavily Democratic districts. And the most, even setting that aside, there are still Republicans living in those districts. The most deeply cynical thing about the strategy, and going back, Alana, to what you said before about Trump treating his supporters as if they are collateral damage, which we see in his supporters getting arrested for things he told them to do. We see in his supporters sitting out in the cold with no like ride home from the rallies. We see in people like taking medicines he tells them to take that then kill them. In every way, he treats his supporters like collateral damage, and the voting thing is no exception. If you throw out all those mail-in ballots, you're throwing out a lot of Republican votes too. Those votes matter for Senate and House races and down ballot races and DA races and sheriff. I mean, this people's ballots contain a lot more than their presidential vote. And he's willing to disenfranchise his own constituents, and he's willing to undermine conservatives who are with him in his party, just in order to carry out this assault on our democracy. So that does not mean that Republicans would not prefer to throw out as many Democrats. Doesn't mean that they're not targeting Democrats, but it is shocking to me that they are willing to just, betray their own folks like that, for whom they are willing to break so many norms and rules. You've seen, I think, over the weekend that Texas Republicans filed this lawsuit, which we just got news about like right before the show started. So here's a story for you. They filed a lawsuit to toss out 127,000 votes in heavily Democratic Harris County that were cast in drive-through voting lanes, which emerged, of course, the drive-through voting in Harris County was a mechanism for immunocompromised people, for elderly people who couldn't stand in line for hours and hours and hours to be able to cast their vote, admittedly in a heavily Democratic county.
People safe and healthy.
Right? Like, do you want your grandma to have to stand in line for 8 hours? Anyway, it's, you would think that for all Trump says about his like support among seniors, he would want things that make it easier for seniors to vote to be a thing. But anyway, the Texas Supreme Court rejected that challenge without comment, just no, shut down. But that challenge also went to the federal court, to a judge who was known to be quite conservative, Trump appointee. And even that, about an hour ago, even that judge, who was reputedly quite a Trump ally, shot down the challenge. So this to me is like this grain of hope of like his conservative allies and enablers who he is relying on to do completely outrageous things are taking a step back and saying, you know what, I would actually like to retain my legitimacy here, and I'm not doing it.
I'm going to take this as the check column in positive outlook. Maybe this won't be so bad column.
Yeah, exactly.
But I listen, since we've started this show, we have seen so many lawsuits come about that I'm not even convinced they're all over. And what I mean by that is there could be more happening. I wouldn't be surprised if we've already missed a new lawsuit that could throw thousands of ballots into question, because that's part of their strategy. And of course, the end of voting will only bring even a different type of lawsuit with the same exact intent, which is, again, to steal the election for Donald Trump by casting doubt on the validity of ballots and the validity of ballots that are less likely to favor him.
Yeah.
That's his goal, to throw out as many legitimate votes as possible, because we know that if more votes are counted, the more likely it is for him to lose.
He'll get fired. So today is our last day of doing this show before we come back to you tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening, our show's not going to be on as usual at 4. We're starting a little bit later in the day so that we can hang out with you all night long. Me and Alana and Jay and our friend Elizabeth, we're gonna be here with you come hell or high water. But I just want to take a minute to say, I know that if you're watching this show, it's probably because you are like me, like extremely anxious for this sustained election to just be over, and you are desperate for numbers to start rolling in and votes to start getting counted. And what I said to Alana as we sat down, we were talking about something else. I said, look, it's 2020. Like 2020 will 2020. 2020 is going to 2020 all over us. Nothing has been easy this year. Probably tomorrow is going to be no different. So please set your expectations now. Hang with us, and we will not, I hope, say anything dumb. But if you're going to watch major election coverage on the major networks, please remain skeptical about any calls for any states. Even when they say like 100% of precincts reporting, that does not mean 100% of votes in. That just means projections are being made, guesses are being made. Most of what you hear on the major networks on election day are educated guesses. And when we tweet them, when we repeat them, when we take them as real, we are giving validity to a system that is not actually based on the real outcome numbers. So please don't listen to Donald Trump declaring victory, as he will in a tweet somewhere between 9 and 11 p.m. Eastern. But yeah, wishy-washy language. Listen for that lawyer language. You know, we are projecting victory. If we do get an actual result tomorrow, like I said, it's probably because the blue wave isn't going to happen because the blue wave happened up front. And Biden has amassed such a lead that the mail-in ballots are not going to change that. He could get an insurmountable vote in key states that start counting their ballots a little earlier than, you know, tag along Pennsylvania. And that would give us some certainty tomorrow. But just brace yourself, because tomorrow is probably not going to be the decisive day you want it to be. Yes, we can dream about a decisive Biden lead in like Florida, North Carolina, Texas. Those would be pretty decisive states, but that is the outside chance. That is not probably what's going to happen.
And when you mention those states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, if it comes down to those sorts of battleground states, we're in pretty big trouble. Because those are states that do not allow the pre-canvassing of ballots, meaning that despite all of the people who have sent their mail-in ballots maybe a few weeks ago, they're not being counted right now. Why? I don't know. Neither of us understand. We keep trying to. Voter suppression is all we got. So it's simply not possible, given those counting processes, that votes will be able to be counted by the deadline that Donald Trump has set. And again, they don't need to be finished counting those votes by election day. There's no law that requires that. No law that requires them to be even done counting the week after election day, even though we all would love the end to this horrible reality TV show to see all of those votes counted. Trump understands how everybody treats this election like the Super Bowl, every election like the Super Bowl. He understands that everybody wants to get a result on election night, and he is going to exploit that desire. We saw in that first clip that he's already doing that. And so what he's going to do is hold up incomplete numbers that portray him as the front runner or the winner. And at the same time, he'll be fighting to throw away ballots that work against him. And he'll claim that any batches of ballots that are counted, but not in his favor, he's going to say they're illegitimate or fraudulent or can't be trusted.
So a good leader tries, in my mind, hard to not put people in harm's way. Like that's kind of like bare minimum of what I want out of a good leader, is someone who is concerned for my safety and maybe everybody's safety. But Donald Trump's rhetoric shows again that he really, as does his COVID-19 response, but it really shows the degree to which he does not care about the conditions for people on the ground. Think of what we've seen this week. Mounting confrontations between Trump supporters and other groups. A caravan of Trump supporters in Texas surrounding a Biden bus, Mad Max style, nearly running a Biden staffer's car off the road. On Sunday, by the way, after that came out on video, police investigating, Trump defended those drivers, saying they were patriots, and saying they'd done nothing wrong, when in fact what they did was quite illegal. And if Alana or I had ever had a client who'd done that, they would be in on bail right now. No, they wouldn't, because we're really good lawyers, but like, that's a crime. He's defending criminal activity among people who agree with him. And it's dangerous. This follows a number of incidents of armed Trump supporters showing up at polling places in extremely intimidating faux military gear, or, you know, with weapons visible. Trump has seeded this idea among his supporters that their enemies are going to cheat him out of a win. Mm-hmm. And when, of course, he's the one planning the cheating, but this anger and this angst and this feeling that they, the supporters, are also going to get cheated, it's really, really dangerous. It riles people up in a way that is like a powder keg, and I don't know what it could lead to. I think most concerning to me is seeing the degree to which it's not limited to, you know, fervent civilian Trump supporters. We're seeing police officers in many areas siding with Trump supporters who have been inciting chaos or behaving in threatening ways. If nothing else, we're seeing how, something we talk about a lot, but how hypocritical and selective claims of law and order really are, because law and order only protects certain in-groups. And now we're seeing that in-group might be Trump supporters.
Absolutely. And I think we're particularly seeing how, just like you're saying, Emily, there's this need for Trump to incite violence, to incite conflict, and to make it so that his supporters really feel emboldened to do things that hurt people and hurt themselves, which sort of contributes to this like complete opposite, just like you're saying, of law and order, complete opposite of public safety. And so not only are police taking Trump's side, even in places here like New York City, where we recently saw that an NYPD officer was recently suspended for yelling Trump 2020 over his cruiser's PA system. But it also looks like law enforcement in some places are doing their part to align themselves with Republicans to suppress the vote. So in Alamance County, North Carolina, we saw on Saturday that officers pepper sprayed attendees and arrested attendees at a Get Out the Vote rally. And that included children, claiming that participants were blocking the roadway without permission. We saw a clip from that, and we're going to play that clip right now. It's from Carly Brasso, who is a reporter at the News and Observer. Let's play that now.
Get back up!
That it expected lots of people from that rally to vote that day, but very few had showed up. And the sheriff in that county, Terry Johnson, had previously been the subject of a Justice Department civil rights lawsuit for discriminatory policing, but a Republican appointed federal judge dismissed that suit, and Johnson had won re-election twice since without facing a challenger. Johnson has announced that he's running again in 2022.
Local elections matter. I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm looking at that rally and I'm thinking like a little Get Out the Vote rally in a little square in front of a courthouse is something I could totally imagine attending with my kid. Right. They pepper sprayed kids, families and kids. I mean, it's anyway, we told you that winning this election would not be easy. Republicans want to make it harder to vote. When people vote anyway, despite things like this, you know, Trump and his allies are prepared to do everything in their power to strip people of those legitimately cast ballots. Now, I'd like to go back for just 1 second to that clip of Donald Trump talking about the Supreme Court, because I think the central tension that's developing in my mind here, Alana, is that Trump is talking to the Supreme Court. He's yelling at them. He did not like their ruling. He is expecting loyalty. One thing that everybody who interviews him or knows him says is that he prizes loyalty above all other things. James Comey, loyalty. I think that we see this tension between Trump telling the Supreme Court that he expects their loyalty, even if it delegitimizes their entire branch of our government. And perhaps, I hope, we will see pushback from the justices who want to retain some semblance of legitimacy for the Roberts Court. We'll see what Amy Coney, but let's see how Amy Coney Barrett feels about that.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see. I think something worth noting that we haven't quite touched on in today's episode, but we've touched on in previous episodes, is that even if this effort to make it so that as many ballots are discounted as possible, even if that doesn't work out for Donald Trump, he has a backup plan. And it's to understand that backup plan, we'll explain it again, requires a really good understanding of how elections work generally. So when you're voting, let's say in Pennsylvania, for example, the governor and the secretary of state are the ones who are tasked with certifying the vote, meaning they're the ones who say, okay, this slate of electors are the ones who most people voted for, and therefore they are the ones who are going to vote in the Electoral College. So let's say Pennsylvania, Biden electors win there, or Biden electors are the ones that are certified by the Secretary of State and the governor, who are both Democrats. Let's say in that scenario, we have a GOP legislature. That legislature, we have good reason to believe that that legislature will then say, no, we're just going to send a whole bunch of fraudulent electors to vote in the Electoral College instead. And this is something that is very possible. Trump has already stated, for example, that we have real partisans as the governor in Pennsylvania. And that's something for us to be really concerned about, because that shows that he has multiple ways to try to subvert the results of this election. And we also spoke with Joanna McClinton in Pennsylvania, who told us that that's something that electors there the legislature there really could be willing to do. So we do want to prepare you for all the different sorts of scenarios that could come out of this election. And to do that, we are going to play a video that our good friend, Zach Mallitz, who is co-author of the Count Guide, made with Now This to break it down. We're going to play that clip for you now and then come back to wrap things up.
Donald Trump loses, there's a real danger that he will try to overturn the results and steal the election. And we have a very good idea of how he'd try to do it. This isn't a conspiracy theory. Trump has repeatedly told us that he won't accept the results of the election if he loses.
It'll end up being a rigged election, or they will never come out with an outcome. They'll have to do it again.
The only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election.
I don't want to see a crooked election. This election will be the most rigged election in history.
That may sound impossible, but unfortunately, our election system is poorly designed and vulnerable to an attack by a would-be autocrat like Donald Trump. Here's how it works. There are two vote counts that determine who wins the presidency. The first count is of voters' ballots, and it happens between now and December 8th. While there's no hard deadline for states to finish counting voters' ballots, federal law creates a strong incentive for states to finish by December 8th. The second count is of the Electoral College votes themselves. When you vote for a presidential candidate, you're actually voting for a slate of electors, actual people who vote to elect the president. Those 538 electors, collectively referred to as the Electoral College, then vote to choose the president. Each state's electors meet in their state on December 14th. They vote for the president and send a record of their votes to Congress. Then, on January 6th, the newly elected Congress, not the current one, counts Electoral College votes. This count in Congress is what actually determines who the president is. If Trump tries to steal the presidency, he'll do it by disrupting both of these counts. Between Election Day and December 14th, we should expect Trump and his allies to disrupt the ballot count and try to delay it past when the Electoral College meets on December 14th. His campaign could file legal and administrative challenges against ballots. We may see armed white supremacist militias attempt to directly prevent boards of elections from counting ballots, and Trump may even order federal agents to seize ballots or halt the count in some places. Creating chaos, delaying the ballot count, and potentially making it impossible to complete the ballot count before the Electoral College meets on December 14th would all be intended to sow public doubt about the legitimacy of the election. That's when the Republicans would make their move. Normally, the governor of a state is responsible for certifying which candidate's electors should be appointed to the Electoral College based on which candidate won the state's popular vote. This is where the constitutional crisis could begin. Republican state legislatures in key swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, each of which has a Democratic governor and a Republican-led state legislature, could declare that the election has been corrupted by fraud, that an accurate ballot count is impossible, and that Trump is the rightful winner. The legislature could then vote to illegally appoint a second, rival slate of Trump electors to vote alongside the legitimately appointed slate of Biden electors on December 14th. That would result in the state sending two contradictory votes to Congress. This may sound far-fetched, but it's happened before. In 1876, 4 states sent competing slates of electors to Congress in the election between Democrat Samuel Tilden and Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. The result was a major constitutional crisis. Following protracted negotiations, which concluded only days before the inauguration, the two parties reached a political compromise to determine the winner. Hayes was sworn in as the president in return for the withdrawal of federal troops from the South, thus effectively ending Reconstruction and ushering in a century of Jim Crow. If a state sends 2 slates of electors to Congress, Congress must determine which electors to count and which to discard. And if that happens, and the outcome of the presidential election comes down to a vote in Congress, we can be sure that Republicans will do everything in their power to make Trump the winner on January 6th. They'll do that even if it means violating political norms and even the law. What we're talking about is not an election, it's a coup. We will be in a fight to save democracy. The good news is that if Trump tries to steal the election, we can block him if we take decisive action. If Trump tries to steal the election, we need to protest by the tens of millions. And we need to keep protesting until Trump concedes and leaves the White House. A contested election won't be a legal fight. It will be a struggle of political will. And we need to demonstrate that the American people will not tolerate a coup, that we will fight to defend the Constitution. But protest will not be enough. We also need elected Democrats to do their part. Key swing states, including Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, have Democratic governors, and Democrats have control of the House. Democrats may also take control of the U.S. Senate in this election. That gives Democrats the power to stop Trump if they treat this like a no-holds-barred political fight to save democracy. Specifically, we need Democrats to do 3 things. First, Joe Biden must not concede unless and until every single vote has been counted and it becomes clear that Trump is the legitimate winner. Biden has to be willing to take the fight all the way to Congress. Second, if Trump prevents all of the ballots from being counted, or if Republican legislatures appoint fraudulent Trump electors, Democratic governors need to be willing to appoint Biden electors. Third, Democrats in Congress need to do whatever it takes to stop Republicans from counting illegitimate Trump electors, up to and including shutting down Congress and preventing Electoral College votes from being counted. If you want to know more, go to www.thecountguide.com. Becky Bond, Brandon Evans, and I just released a comprehensive guide on what Trump can do to steal the election and how we can stop him. The only way Trump can steal this election is if we let him. If we fight for our democracy, we will win.
Man, it feels completely unprecedented to be sitting here a few hours from Election Day, having to wonder if a sitting American president is really going to attempt what would amount to a slow motion coup. I also have a little bit of news for our viewers who were with us a few minutes ago when we talked about the Harris County drive-through voting. Are we going to throw away grandma's ballot case? And we were impressed to find that a very conservative federal judge had shut that down. Shut down the attempt to toss out those ballots. Well, we just found out that it's being appealed to the Fifth Circuit. So I'm going to frame this for you in a way that makes you feel good at the end of the day, because it's after 5 o'clock here on the East Coast, and you shouldn't have to feel even worse in this climate. I'm going to say this is a great opportunity for yet another federal judge, and in this case, perhaps a slate of federal appellate judges, to telegraph quite clearly to Donald Trump and his enablers that the federal judiciary is not going to serve as a personal concierge to and rubber stamp for the Trump administration. It's a chance. In this time of enormous uncertainty, the only thing we know for sure is that this is a make or break moment for our democracy. The stand that these judges take, the stand that the voters take, the stand that local elected officials take will define the moral character of this nation. It may be the most important election of our lifetimes. It may also be the most important election in the lifetime of this country, which has had a pretty good run so far. And I think as soon as I said that, I was like, nah, but we can make it better. And we can make our democracy better. We can make it stronger, and we can keep it going. This is our shot. So if you have not yet made the choice to get out there and vote, to take your family, to take your friends, to take your grandma, if she went to the drive-through thing that might get her vote tossed, go. Please go. This is your moment to make your stand, to stand up for our vision of a representative form of government, to stand up for your right to be heard and your right to fire your elected officials if you don't like them. Hire someone new. This year, though, you're going to have to do more probably than just make that stand. You may have to ensure that you, as a member of the American electorate, remain in control of who's running this country. Not someone, perhaps, who would send out a call to white supremacists to stand back and stand by. That's our show for today. I hope that we never need this show again, but we'll be here with you tomorrow night. We'll be hanging with you all night if you want to watch us. We will be critiquing the mainstream media. We will be having guests, tons of guests. It's going to be like a American political Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but perhaps a little spicier and with more grown-up words. But please, before we get there, before you come and hang with us tomorrow night, please go out there and vote. This has been our show. I'm Emily Galvan-Almanza, Solana Sivan, and we'll see you